My name is Ethan Whitmore. I'm 29 years old. 4 weeks ago, my parents sold my grandmother's 1892 Steinway piano, the one she promised would be mine, and used all $95,000 to buy my younger sister a brand new Mercedes. They told everyone it was an investment in her future. What they didn't say was that my grandmother never agreed to sell it. They thought she was too sick in hospice to ever find out. They thought the morphine would keep her quiet, and they thought I'd do what I've done my whole life, keep my head down and stay out of it. They were wrong when I told my grandmother what they'd done. I expected tears, shock, maybe even heartbreak. Instead, she just looked at me for a long moment. Calm, clear. Almost disappointed, but not surprised. Then, she reached for her phone. She dialed one number from memory, put it on speaker, and when a man answered, she said 7 words that would dismantle everything my parents believed they owned. Sunday. Elaine's birthday. At my house. That was it. 7 words. Before I tell you what those words meant and what happened next at my mother's 60th birthday party, you need to understand something. This wasn't just about a piano. It was about who gets erased in a family and who gets elevated. It was about what happens when people mistake silence for weakness. And it was about the day my parents learned that borrowed things always have to be returned. The call came on a Tuesday afternoon, right after my last piano lesson. I was stacking sheet music when my phone buzzed. Dad, no hello. No build-up. Your grandmother had another hard episode. They're moving her to hospice. Family meeting in an hour. That was it. I drove straight to the hospital. When I got there, my parents and my sister Chloe were already gathered in the corner of the waiting room, like they were discussing quarterly earnings instead of end-of-life care. Dad stood with his arms crossed. Mom clutched her purse like it was a flotation device. Chloe was scrolling through her phone. One leg crossed over the other. Barely looking up. Good, you're here, Dad said when he saw me. Not, how are you holding up? Not. This must be hard. Just logistics. We need to divide responsibilities. I should have expected that. Dad cleared his throat. Your mother and I have the firm to run. This Keller deal is sensitive right now. The Keller deal. Translation: Chloe's boyfriend Brandon Keller, son of Dad's most valuable business partner. 8 months in, and suddenly Chloe wasn't just their daughter. She was a strategic asset. Dad looked at me. You'll handle the hospital visits? Daily. Keep us updated. It wasn't a question. My schedule's not empty, I said carefully. I teach 38 students a week. After school program too. Dad gave a tight smile. You're not exactly pulling 80-hour weeks. Ethan. There it was. The quiet reminder that what I do doesn't count. Mom chimed in. Chloe's in a delicate stage with the Kellers. Appearances matter. We can't have her tied up at a hospice every evening. Chloe finally glanced up. I'll visit when I can, she said. Already typing again, which meant rarely. I looked at my parents. I'd been here before. The dependable one, the flexible one. The one whose time was elastic and whose career was always described as nice. Fine, I said. I'll go every day. Perfect. Dad was already checking his watch. Keep us posted if anything changes. As I walked toward Grandma's room, I heard my mother's voice drift down the hallway. She thought I was out of earshot. At least he's useful for something, Chloe laughed softly. I didn't stop walking. That's the thing about being the quiet son in a family like mine. You get used to it. You get used to being the adjustable piece, the backup plan, the emotional labor no one acknowledges. My sister was the golden child. Chloe had the charisma, the polish, the kind of ambition my parents understood. She'd majored in marketing, worked at a startup downtown, dressed like she was already interviewing for a board seat somewhere. And now she was dating into money. Brandon Keller came from old money. The kind with country club memberships and unspoken expectations. Since that relationship started, my parents had shifted orbit. Dinners were curated, conversations rehearsed. Everything about Chloe became high priority. Meanwhile, I taught kids how to play scales. Don't get me wrong, I love what I do. Watching a 7-year-old finally land a clean arpeggio feels like a small miracle. But in my parents' world, it wasn't impressive. It didn't open doors. It didn't leverage partnerships. It didn't matter. Grandma was the only one who ever treated my work like it had weight. Which is why what happened next hit the way it did. Because the Steinway wasn't just an instrument. It was the one thing in that family that ever felt like it was meant for me. Grandma's hospice room didn't smell like a hospital. It smelled like lavender and old paper. She insisted on both. They try to make everything smell like antiseptic, she told me on my first visit. If I'm going to die, I'll do it surrounded by things I recognize. She was 76. Congestive heart failure. The doctors gave her weeks, maybe a month if she was stubborn. She was stubborn. Sharp, too. Her mind cut cleaner than most people half her age. I started going every evening after my last lesson. I'd stop by my apartment, swap my teaching binder for a jacket, and drive straight to hospice. I never told my parents how long I stayed. They never asked. Grandma and I talked about music mostly. About the concert halls she used to play in across the Northeast. About the way a room feels different depending on its acoustics. About how you can tell within 3 notes whether someone's playing from memory or from muscle. I told her about my students. The kid who kept rushing tempo. The girl who refused to count out loud. The way some of them lit up the first time they realized they could make something beautiful with their own hands. She listened. Like it mattered. One evening, about 2 weeks before everything blew up, she reached for my hand. Her grip wasn't strong anymore. But it was steady. "Ethan," she said, "I need you to understand something." "Okay." The Steinway. I didn't need clarification. I'd learned my first scales on that piano at 7 years old, ivory keys slightly yellowed with age, a middle C that carried deeper than any modern instrument I've ever touched. "That piano was my mother's," she said. 1892? "It's older than this house." I nodded. "It belongs to you." She didn't say it gently. She said it like a fact. "I've told your father and Elaine. I told them last month. In front of everyone." I remembered that dinner. Dad's jaw tightening, Mom forcing a smile, Chloe whispering something about sentimental clutter. "Grandma, you don't have to, I want to." Her eyes locked on mine. "You're the only one who understands what it is, not what it's worth." What it is. There's a difference. Anyone can look up a price tag. Not everyone understands legacy. "Promise me you'll take care of it," she said. "I will." She studied my face like she was measuring something. "There are things more valuable than money," she said quietly. "And some people only learn that when it costs them." At the time, I thought she meant life, or regret. I didn't realize she was already thinking several moves ahead. 2 weeks later, Grandma asked me to bring her some old photographs from the house. Pictures from her touring years. She said she wanted to see them one more time. I still had a key. It was raining that Thursday afternoon. The kind of steady gray rain that makes everything feel muted. I remember thinking the house looked smaller than usual when I pulled into the driveway. Too quiet. I unlocked the front door and stepped inside. The air felt wrong. I walked past the dining room, down the short hallway, and into the living room, and stopped. The Steinway was gone, not covered, not moved, gone. Where it had stood for 30 years, there was nothing but a rectangular indentation pressed into the carpet, 4 small circular marks where the legs had rested. A ghost outline of something that used to matter. I just stood there. My brain tried to fill in the shape, like maybe I was looking at it from the wrong angle. Like maybe it had been moved to another room. It hadn't. My hands were shaking when I pulled out my phone. "Mom," I said when she answered. "Where's Grandma's piano?" A pause. "Your father handled it," she said lightly. "It was an adult decision." "What does that mean?" "It means you don't need to worry about it." "Where is it?" I said. "Don't worry about it, Ethan." And she hung up. I stayed there for a long minute, staring at the empty space, rain tapping against the windows, the house sounding hollow in a way I'd never noticed before. Then, I got back in my car and drove straight to my parents' place. Dad opened the door holding a glass of scotch. "You look upset," he said. "The piano," I replied. "What did you do?" He didn't hesitate. "Sold it. 95,000, good price." The room tilted slightly. "You sold it?" "Your grandmother doesn't need a piano in hospice," he said calmly. "And neither do you." Behind him, I heard the metallic jingle of keys. Chloe stepped into view, smiling. "New car," she said, swinging a silver Mercedes key fob between her fingers. "Isn't it beautiful?" I looked at my father. "You bought her a car with Grandma's piano." Dad took a slow sip of his drink. "Chloe needs to make the right impression with the Kellers. This is an investment. It was promised to me." Mom appeared behind him, arms crossed. "And what exactly were you going to do with it, Ethan? You teach beginner scales to children?" "That piano would have been wasted." Chloe laughed softly. "Don't be jealous. It's not a good look." I looked at all 3 of them, and something in me went still. "Does Grandma know?" I asked. Silence. "Does she know you sold her piano?" Mom stepped forward, her voice lowering. "She's on morphine half the time. She doesn't need unnecessary stress." "You mean, you don't want her to know?" Her eyes hardened. "If you tell her and it causes a setback, if something happens that will be on you." The implication hung there. "Do you want to be responsible for killing your grandmother?" I should have backed down. I didn't. "Grandma deserves the truth," I said quietly. Then I walked out. I didn't sleep that night. My apartment felt smaller than usual. 1 bedroom, second-hand couch, a keyboard set up near the window, sheet music stacked on the coffee table. The kind of place my parents liked to call temporary. Even though I'd been there 3 years, I sat in the dark with only the streetlight cutting across the floor. "If something happens, that will be on you." My mother's voice kept replaying. It was a clean tactic, efficient, surgical. Make me the villain before I ever open my mouth. I grabbed the framed photo off my bookshelf. Grandma at her final recital 20 years ago. Chin lifted, fingers hovering above the Steinway, completely alive in that moment. They sold that piano like it was furniture. I stood up and paced the length of my living room. Back and forth, back and forth. I poured coffee at midnight and never drank it. My hands kept clenching without me realizing. What if Mom was right? What if the shock hurt her? What if telling her the truth did push her heart too far? The thought sat heavy in my chest. But then, another one followed it. What if I said nothing? What if I let her die believing her son had honored her wishes, that the piano was safe, that her word meant something? I leaned against the kitchen counter and closed my eyes. When I was 12, I failed a math exam and tried to hide it. Grandma found out anyway. She didn't yell. She just said, "Truth can sting, Ethan. But lies rot, and rot spreads, rot spreads." I'd spent 29 years keeping peace, swallowing comments, accepting scraps, letting Chloe shine while I handled whatever needed handling. Every holiday, every gathering, every subtle reminder that I wasn't the impressive one. And now, they expected me to protect their lie, too. At around 3 in the morning, something settled inside me. Not anger, clarity. If I stayed quiet, I wasn't protecting Grandma, I was protecting them. And I was done doing that. I set my alarm for 6:00 a.m. I'd go to hospice before my first lesson. I'd sit beside her bed, look her in the eye, and tell her exactly what her son had done. Whatever happened after that wouldn't be on me. It would be on the people who decided they could steal from a dying woman and call it strategy. Grandma was awake when I walked into her room the next morning. Sunlight filtered through the thin curtains, casting a pale gold line across her blanket. She looked smaller than usual, but her eyes were sharp. "You look like hell," she said. "Didn't sleep." She studied me for a second. "Sit." I pulled a chair close to her bed and took her hand. It felt lighter than I remembered, fragile, but steady. "Grandma," I said, forcing the words out before I could overthink them. "I need to tell you something. And it's not good." Her expression didn't change. "Then tell me." So I did. The empty space in the living room, the $95,000, the Mercedes in Chloe's name, Dad calling it an investment, Mom's warning, every piece of it. I didn't dramatize it, I just laid it out. When I finished, I waited. I expected anger, shock, maybe even a spike in the monitors beside her bed. Instead, she let out a slow breath. Not surprised, resigned. "I was wondering how long it would take," she said quietly. "You knew I know my son." Her voice was calm. "I've known him for 58 years. I've watched who he's chosen to become." I felt something twist in my chest. "You're not upset, oh." "I'm upset," she said, "just not confused." There was a difference. She squeezed my hand weakly. I hoped he'd prove me wrong. That, when the time came, he'd remember who he was raised to be. A pause. "But hope is not a plan." She reached toward the small table beside her bed. "Hand me my phone." I passed it to her. She didn't scroll. She tapped a name from memory and hit call. After 3 rings, a man answered. "Margaret?" "Walter," she said. "It's time." A brief silence. "I understand," he replied. "Sunday," she said clearly. "Elaine's birthday. At my house. I'll prepare everything." She ended the call and handed the phone back to me. "Grandma," I said slowly. "What's happening Sunday, Justice?" she replied. "In front of witnesses." I stared at her. She looked tired now, but there was steel underneath it. "I've spent 5 years preparing for the possibility that my son would mistake generosity for ownership," she said. "I won't leave you unprotected." 5 years. "You planned this?" I asked. "I prepared," she corrected. Then she looked directly at me. "You spent your whole life shrinking to keep the peace, Ethan." Sunday. "You don't shrink. You stand there. You let the truth speak." My throat tightened. "What do you need me to do?" "Show up," she said. "Dress well. Say little. And bring patience." A faint smile touched her lips. "The kind I taught you when you wanted to quit Chopin. Despite everything." I almost laughed. "Are you sure?" I asked. "I'm sure," she said. "I should have protected you sooner." Her eyes softened. "I won't leave without fixing this." 2 days later, I was sitting in a law office 20 minutes outside the city. Walter Hayes looked exactly how you'd expect a man who keeps other people's secrets for a living to look. Late 60s, silver hair, gold-rimmed glasses, movements precise, controlled. His office smelled like leather and paper. "Ethan Whitmore," he said, shaking my hand. "Your grandmother speaks highly of you. That makes one of us." I muttered before I could stop myself. A flicker of something almost amusement crossed his face. "Let's get to it." He opened a thick folder and turned it toward me. "Do you know who owns the house your parents live in?" "Yes," I said automatically. "They do. Grandma gave it to them after Grandpa died." He didn't respond. He simply slid a document across the desk. I looked down. Property deed. Owner Margaret Whitmore. No transfer record, no amendment, no co-signature, no refiled deed. I blinked. That's not possible, I said. They've lived there 10 years, correct, Walter said calmly. Rent-free. By permission. Not by ownership. I stared at the page. They think it's theirs. They were allowed to think many things, he replied. That does not make them true. My head felt heavy. All this time, I said slowly. My father talks about equity, assets, stability. Walter leaned back slightly. Your grandmother permitted them to reside there? She never transferred title. She told them she was letting them build a life. They interpreted that as ownership. Or chose to. Why would she let them believe that, I asked? Because she was watching, Walter said. And because sometimes the only way to reveal character is to give someone rope. Silence settled between us. Then he opened another folder. 5 years ago, he continued, your grandmother established an irrevocable trust. My pulse ticked up, in anticipation of what she described as financial irresponsibility and moral drift. That sounded like her. The trust holds her liquid accounts, the property, and any item designated as sentimental or historically significant. My stomach tightened. The Steinway, I said. Yes. He met my eyes. You are the sole beneficiary. For a moment, I forgot to breathe. Why me? I asked. Because, he said evenly. She believes you understand value beyond price. The words hit harder than I expected. Walter wasn't finished. The piano sale, he continued, constitutes unauthorized disposal of trust property. So legally, he said, folding his hands, your parents sold something that did not belong to them. The proceeds must be returned, or litigation follows. I ran a hand over my face. They're going to lose their minds. They may, he said. But they will not win. I left the office in a fog. The sky was low and gray. The kind of afternoon that feels suspended. On the drive home, I kept replaying it, the house, the trust, the fact that my father had been hosting dinners, bragging about property value, negotiating business deals in a home he didn't own, and had never owned. That night, I dug through a box Grandma had given me years ago. Old concert programs, photographs, press clippings from when she toured. At the bottom was an envelope, my name written in her handwriting, Ethan. In case you ever need clarity. Inside was a copy of the trust summary. Her signature dated 5 years back. Clipped to it was a small handwritten note. The house never left my hands, it was borrowed. And some borrowers forget that. I read it 3 times. Sunday wasn't just a birthday party. It was an eviction of illusion. The night before the party, Grandma called. Her voice was thinner, but steady. Are you ready? As I'll ever be? Good, she said. Your father announced the piano sale publicly last month. Claimed it was a family decision. My jaw tightened. Then, the correction needs to be public too. This isn't revenge, she added softly. It's accountability. I know. A quiet pause. After I'm gone, she said, I need you protected. Not dependent on their goodwill. I'm not a kid, I said. I know, she replied. That's why you're ready. I stood at my apartment window after we hung up, looking out at the streetlights. They had no idea what was coming, and for the first time in my life, I wasn't the one walking into a room unprepared. Sunday came cold and bright. The kind of winter sunlight that makes everything look sharper than it feels. I parked at the end of the driveway and sat in my car for a minute before getting out. The house, Grandma's house, was dressed up like it belonged to someone else. A banner stretched across the porch. Happy 60th, Elaine. Cars lined the curb. At least 30 guests inside, judging by the noise drifting through the front door. I wore a dark navy blazer. Nothing flashy, just solid, composed. Grandma had said dress well, say little, bring patience. I walked in. The smell hit first: perfume, catered food, expensive wine. Then the living room. The corner where the Steinway had stood for 30 years was filled with a tall decorative plant. Broad green leaves trying to occupy space they didn't understand. It looked ridiculous, like someone trying to patch over a bullet hole with wallpaper. Mom stood near the dining table in a red dress, smiling wide as relatives complimented her. Dad moved through the room shaking hands, laughing too loudly, working the crowd like a man who believed every inch of the place was his. Chloe hovered near the fireplace, attached to Brandon Keller's arm. She looked polished, controlled, the Mercedes key fob visible on purpose in her hand. In the far corner, nearly invisible, sat Walter Hayes, briefcase beside his chair, watching. He caught my eye, gave a subtle nod. I nodded back. Aren't you going to say hello to your mother? Mom asked when she noticed me. Happy birthday, I said. She kissed the air near my cheek. Dad clapped a hand on my shoulder. Try to enjoy yourself today, Ethan. I almost smiled at that. Enjoy. A few minutes later, Dad tapped his glass with a spoon. Everyone, if I could have your attention. The room quieted. He stepped into the center of the living room. Back straight, voice confident. Today we celebrate 60 incredible years of my wife, Elaine. Applause. And he continued. We also celebrate the bright future of our family. My stomach tightened. He gestured toward Chloe and Brandon. As many of you know, Chloe and Brandon have been building something very special. Brandon forced a polite smile. To honor that future, Dad said. We made a meaningful investment. He motioned toward the front door. Come see. The crowd spilled outside onto the driveway. There it was, a silver Mercedes-Benz, red bow across the hood, paint gleaming under winter sun. Chloe squealed, playing the part perfectly, wrapping her arms around Dad. Cameras came out. Phones lifted. Dad raised his voice. This was made possible by Margaret's generosity. She decided to sell her old piano to invest in her granddaughter's future. There it was. The lie. Clean. Public. Rehearsed. A woman near me whispered, I thought that piano was supposed to go to Ethan. Her husband shrugged. Plans change. Chloe turned toward me, smiling sweetly. Come take a picture. Ethan, she called. Don't look so serious. It's just a car. Just a car. Behind me, I heard the soft click of a briefcase opening. We were still standing in the driveway when Aunt Lydia stepped forward. She wasn't loud. She didn't need to be. Martin, she said evenly. Did Margaret approve the sale of that piano? The air shifted. Dad smiled. Controlled but thinner now. Mother isn't in a position to manage those decisions. We handled it for her benefit. I spoke to her yesterday, Aunt Lydia replied. She was clear-headed, and she said she never agreed. Murmurs rippled through the crowd. Mom stiffened. Lydia, this is not the time. Actually, a calm voice cut in from behind us. This appears to be exactly the time. Walter Hayes stepped forward, briefcase in hand. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't need theatrics. My name is Walter Hayes. I represent Margaret Whitmore. You could feel the temperature drop. Dad's expression faltered. Since when does my mother need an attorney present at a birthday party? Since approximately 30 years ago. Walter replied smoothly. I also represented your father. A few guests exchanged glances. Walter opened his briefcase and removed a folder. Margaret asked that I clarify several matters today. In the presence of family and business associates, that last part wasn't accidental. Mr. Keller was standing 5 feet away. Walter held up a document. First, ownership of the property in which we are currently gathered. Dad's jaw tightened. This house, Walter continued, is titled solely in the name of Margaret Whitmore. He turned the document outward. Here is the deed. No transfer has ever been executed. Silence. Mom let out a sharp breath. That's absurd. We've lived here for 10 years. Yes, Walter said. By permission, not by ownership. The murmuring grew louder. Dad's composure cracked just slightly. My mother told us the house was ours. She told you that you could live here, Walter corrected. There is a difference. Mr. Keller shifted his weight. Walter continued. For the past decade, property taxes, major repairs, and utilities have been paid from Margaret Whitmore's accounts. Mom's face drained of color. Legally, Walter said, you are tenants at will, and that arrangement can be terminated. Chloe looked between our parents, confusion bleeding into panic. This is ridiculous, she said. Dad. Walter didn't pause. Second, he said, removing another document. 5 years ago, Margaret Whitmore established an irrevocable trust. Dad went still. The trust was created to safeguard significant assets in the event of mismanagement. The word landed heavy. Under the terms of this trust, the property we stand on, various financial accounts, and all items of historical and sentimental significance were transferred out of personal estate and into protected structure. He looked directly at my father, which includes the 1892 Steinway piano. The driveway felt too small suddenly. And the sole beneficiary of that trust, Walter said, turning a page, is Ethan Whitmore? The words hung in the air. Chloe actually laughed. That's a joke. It is not, Walter replied calmly. Dad found his voice again. This is manipulation. He poisoned her against us. 30 sets of eyes turned toward me. I didn't move, Walter continued. The piano was sold without authorization from the trust. That constitutes improper disposal of protected assets. What does that mean? Chloe asked, her voice thin. It means, Walter said evenly, the $95,000 obtained from the sale must be returned to the trust within 30 days. Dad stared at him. That money went toward the vehicle. Walter nodded toward the Mercedes. Then the asset must be liquidated. Chloe's face crumpled. You can't take my car. I am not taking anything, Walter replied. I am outlining consequences. He closed the first folder and opened another. In addition, public representation of property not legally owned can have broader implications, particularly in business contexts. Mr. Keller stepped back slightly. Dad noticed. You're threatening me, Dad demanded. I am advising you, Walter said. Margaret Whitmore is fully competent and lucid. I met with her this morning. She instructed me to address these matters publicly because the misrepresentation occurred publicly. He paused. Actions have consequences, Mr. Whitmore. Mom's mascara was starting to run. This is my birthday. she whispered. And it remains so, Walter said gently. But ownership does not change for celebration. Chloe looked to Brandon. He wasn't looking at her. He was looking at his father. Mr. Keller's expression had gone cold. Calculating. Dad turned toward me then. You did this, he said. His voice wasn't angry anymore. It was desperate. You told her. Yes, I said. And you twisted it. No, I said again. I stepped forward, just enough that everyone could hear me clearly. I told her the truth. Mom's eyes flashed. If something happens to her, that's on you, I said quietly. Not me. A few people inhaled sharply. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't sell her piano, I continued. I didn't lie about it. I didn't tell everyone it was her idea. Dad opened his mouth. I cut him off. For years I kept quiet because I thought that's what being a good son meant. I let that settle. But I'm not protecting a lie anymore. The driveway was silent except for a faint breeze shifting the ribbon on the hood of the car. Walter stepped back slightly, letting the weight of everything sink in. Formal documentation regarding repayment and tenancy restructuring will be delivered tomorrow, he said. Then he closed his briefcase. No shouting, no dramatic gestures. Just fact. Mr. Keller cleared his throat. Martin, he said carefully. Perhaps we should speak later. That wasn't support. It was distance. Chloe's grip tightened around her keys. Or, what used to be hers. The guests began to disperse slowly. Conversations hushed, eyes avoiding direct contact. The birthday banner hung crooked over the porch. The red bow on the Mercedes looked absurd now. Dad stood motionless in the driveway, for the first time in my life. He looked smaller, not because I'd attacked him, but because the illusion he built around himself had finally cracked. And this time, I wasn't the one shrinking. By the time most of the guests had left, the driveway felt hollow. Paper plates abandoned on tables, half-empty wine glasses sweating in the cold air, the birthday banner sagging slightly at one corner. Dad was the first to find his voice again. You've humiliated this family, he said, not looking at me. I met his eyes. No, I said evenly. You did. Mom stepped forward. Mascara streaked. Anger replacing shock. You've always resented Chloe, always. This was your chance to get back at her. Chloe let out a bitter laugh. Enjoy it, Ethan. Enjoy taking everything. I felt the old reflex rise up, the one that wanted to defend myself. Explain, soften the moment. I didn't take anything, I said. Grandma made her decisions 5 years ago. Dad's jaw clenched. Because you manipulated her. I shook my head once. You sold her piano without asking. You told people it was her idea. You threatened me when I said she deserved to know. My voice stayed calm. Don't rewrite this. For a second, no one spoke. I took a breath. I spent most of my life trying not to be a problem for you, I continued. I stayed quiet. I handled things. I made myself smaller so this family would run smoothly. Mom looked away. But I'm not doing that anymore. The words didn't come out loud. They came out steady. Walter stepped closer to me, lowering his voice. Ethan, we should discuss next steps. Dad let out a sharp exhale. You're throwing us out of our own home. Walter glanced at me. Legally, I could have. Immediate termination, immediate repayment demand, court filings within days. For a split second, the thought tempted me. Make it hurt, make it fast, but that wasn't what this was about. No, I said. All three of them looked at me. The $95,000 gets returned within 90 days, not 30, I said. Sell the car, figure it out? Chloe flinched. You can stay here under a formal lease, I continued. Minimal rent, everything documented. Dad stared at me like I'd spoken another language. And after Grandma passes, I said. The words heavier now. You'll have 12 months to move. Mom blinked. You're being generous. I'm being fair. Walter studied me for a moment. Then nodded once. Very well, he said. We'll draft it accordingly. Dad didn't thank me. He didn't apologize. He just looked tired. For the first time, I wasn't the son asking for approval. I was the one setting terms. And I didn't feel powerful. I felt clear. The fallout was immediate. By Monday afternoon, the story had traveled further than I expected. Social circles like ours move fast when embarrassment is involved. Dad's phone calls started going unanswered. Meetings were rescheduled. One of his long-planned joint ventures with the Kellers worth just over $200,000 collapsed within a week. I didn't hear that from him. I heard it from Aunt Lydia. Trust is everything in business, she told me quietly over coffee. If someone can misrepresent their own mother's property, what else can they misrepresent? That sentence alone did more damage than Walter ever could. Chloe returned the Mercedes 3 days later. The dealership took it back at a $15,000 loss. I wasn't there, but I heard she yelled at the sales manager in the showroom before finally signing the paperwork. Brandon Keller ended things by text. We need distance from the situation. Translation liability. For the first time in her life, Chloe wasn't the center of something glamorous. She was just Someone who'd made a bad bet. I didn't gloat. I didn't reach out either. I kept teaching. I kept visiting Grandma every evening. Hospice got quieter as the weeks went on. Machines hummed, nurses moved softly in the background. The lavender scent still clung to the room. 3 weeks after the party, I got the call at 6:02 a.m. "You should come now," the nurse said gently. "She's asking for you." I drove faster than I should have. Grandma was awake when I arrived, but barely. The morning light washed her in gold. Her breathing was shallow, deliberate. "My boy," she whispered. I sat beside her and took her hand. "I'm here." She studied my face like she was memorizing it. "I should have done this sooner," she said. "Done what protected you." A tear slid down her cheek. "I watched how they minimized you," she continued. "I kept hoping they'd see what I saw. I made excuses because I didn't want to believe my own son could become that." "It's not your fault," I said, though my voice wasn't steady. "Maybe not," she replied. "But it took me too long." I squeezed her hand gently. "You gave me everything that mattered," I said. "Music, backbone, a sense of who I am. That's not nothing." A faint smile touched her lips. "You stopped shrinking," she whispered. "I did. Good." Her eyes fluttered for a second. "Promise me something. Anything. Live like you know your worth." The words lodged somewhere deep. "I will." She nodded once. As if that settled it. That evening, with my hand still wrapped around hers, Grandma Margaret Whitmore passed away, quietly. The funeral was small, just like she'd wanted. No extravagant displays, no dramatic speeches about legacy, just a modest church filled with people who'd actually known her. I played during the service. Not the Steinway that was gone, but the church's old upright, Chopin's Nocturne in E-flat major, the first piece she ever made me practice until my fingers ached. Half the pews were filled with old friends from her performing days, white-haired women who remembered her name from programs decades ago. My parents sat in the back. They didn't approach me before the service. They didn't approach me after. Chloe didn't come at all. Too overwhelmed. Mom told someone. Maybe that was true. Maybe not. When it was time for the eulogy, I stood at the podium and kept it simple. I spoke about discipline, about showing up, about how she believed music wasn't about applause, it was about integrity. I didn't mention the party, I didn't mention the trust. The funeral wasn't a courtroom. Afterward, I saw Dad hesitate across the room. He looked like he might walk toward me. He didn't. Mom touched his arm and guided him toward the exit instead. I watched them leave. And for the first time in my life, I didn't feel like I was waiting for something from them. An apology, approval, recognition. It would have been nice. But it wasn't necessary anymore. Grandma had given me something more important than property. She'd given me confirmation, and that was enough. 6 months after the funeral, I moved into Grandma's house. It felt strange the first night. The rooms were the same, but quieter. No more lavender sachets tucked into drawers. No more faint humming from the kitchen when she cooked, just the sound of the floorboards settling and the wind brushing against the windows. Legally, everything was finalized by then. My parents signed the lease Walter drafted. Minimal rent, strict terms, documented boundaries. They lasted 4 months before deciding they needed a fresh start. They bought a small condo across town, not nearly as impressive. Dad's firm downsized quietly. The Keller partnership never recovered. A few other clients drifted away, nothing dramatic, just slow erosion. Mom joined a different social club. One where fewer people asked questions. We didn't speak. Not because of explosive arguments. Because there wasn't much left to say. The $95,000 was repaid within the 90-day window. The Mercedes had already been returned at a loss. So the remainder came from savings and, I suspect, a loan. I used part of the money to buy a new piano. Not another Steinway. That kind of history can't be replaced. I chose a Yamaha Grand. Clean lines, bright tone, different voice. I placed it in the exact corner where the old Steinway once stood, not to erase it, but to continue something. On weekends, I started teaching lessons out of the house. Word spread quickly. Parents liked the idea of their kids learning in a space with real history. Sometimes I'd pause mid-lesson and catch the light hitting the lid just right. And for a second, I could almost hear Grandma correcting my posture. Shoulders down. "Ethan, let the music breathe." I wasn't bitter. That surprised me. I thought I would be. But bitterness takes energy, and I'd spent too many years exhausted. What I felt instead was steady. 8 months after the funeral, my phone rang. Chloe. I let it go to voicemail the first time. She called again the next day. I answered. Her voice sounded different, quieter, less rehearsed. "I'm not calling to ask for anything," she said. "Okay. I wanted to say I've been thinking about everything." Silence stretched between us. I was angry. She admitted. "I thought you stole something from me." "I didn't," I said calmly. "I know that now." Another pause. "I'm working at a marketing firm," she continued. Entry level. I take the bus. I started therapy. That part surprised me. My therapist says I never learned boundaries, she said with a hollow laugh. Or consequences, I didn't interrupt. Being the favorite isn't what I thought it was, she added. It just means you never learn how to fall. There was no self-pity in her voice. Just fatigue. I'm not asking you to forgive me, she said. I just wanted you to know I see it now. I looked around the living room. The house felt balanced. I'm willing to talk, I said slowly. But trust takes time, I understand. We didn't hug it out. We didn't fix 29 years in one phone call. But the door wasn't locked anymore. Spring came a few weeks later. A full year since Grandma entered hospice. One evening, I sat at the piano with the windows open. The air carried the smell of jasmine from the garden she used to tend herself. I played the same Chopin nocturne she taught me as a kid. The notes filled the room, climbed the walls, and settled into the quiet like they belonged there. I thought about the birthday party, the driveway, the red bow on the Mercedes. The moment the truth shifted everything. I thought about my father sitting in that driveway looking smaller than I'd ever seen him. I don't hate him. Hate is loud. What I feel is distance. I don't need him to see me anymore. I see myself. That's the difference. I don't have the original Steinway. I don't have the version of my family I used to pretend existed. But I have something steadier. I have a house that was never borrowed. I have work that matters. I have boundaries that hold. And I have the knowledge that when the moment came, I didn't shrink. That's the real inheritance. Not money, not property, not even the piano. It's the spine you build when you decide you're done apologizing for who you are. If you've ever been the quiet one in a family that only values noise, I hope you remember this. Silence isn't weakness. But staying silent forever can be. Sometimes the most important thing you inherit isn't what's left to you. It's what you finally refuse to carry. If this story resonated with you, consider sharing it with someone who might need it. And remember, this story was created by the Fish Tells Stories team for entertainment purposes only. It is not advice and should not be imitated in real life.